Part 1, Prejudice. A sleek black Lincoln Navigator pulled up to the private Teterboro Airport in New Jersey on a chilly fall morning. Maya Wilson, 38, a management consultant and CEO of Wilson Consulting Group, looked out the window. She smiled as she saw her familiar Gulfstream G650 waiting on the tarmac. The $65 million jet was one of her boldest investments of the past year, but it had already proven its worth as she shuttled between important meetings around the world. "Thank you, Kevin," Maya said to the driver as he opened the door for her. "I'll be back on Sunday. Pick me up at 8 p.m. "Yes, Mrs. Wilson." "Have a nice flight," Kevin replied with a professional smile. Maya stepped out of the car, dragging her Louis Vuitton suitcase and clutching her black Hermès Birkin. Today she wore a charcoal gray suit with a crisp white shirt and Christian Louboutin heels. Her naturally curly hair was pulled back into a bun, and her makeup was light but subtle. She always paid attention to her image, especially on important business trips like this. Today's flight would take her to San Francisco to meet with a potential client, a fast-growing technology company that needed to restructure its management. The deal could bring her company millions of dollars, and Maya had spent weeks preparing for this important presentation. As she stepped into the private airport's waiting room, Maya felt the familiar stares of observation and judgment. She was used to them after more than a decade of working in high-end consulting, an industry where women of color like her were still a minority. "Hello, this is Maya Wilson. I have a flight to San Francisco this morning," she said to the receptionist, her voice confident and clear. The young blonde woman behind the desk looked at her, then down at her computer screen. "Hello, Mrs. Wilson. May I see your papers?" Maya held out her passport and identification card. She had flown from this airport dozens of times in the past year, and usually the staff would recognize her, but today she met a new staff member. "Who are you flying with today?" the receptionist asked, her voice polite but a little suspicious. "I'm flying alone," Maya replied, starting to feel uncomfortable at the question. "And, who are you a guest on this flight?" the receptionist continued, her voice faltering. Maya raised an eyebrow. "I'm not anyone's guest. That's my plane." The young receptionist looked confused. She looked back at the computer screen, then back at Maya, her eyes clearly filled with disbelief. "Excuse me, ma'am. But our system shows that this flight belongs to Wilson Consulting Group. I need to confirm that you are authorized to use this plane." Maya felt anger rising inside her, but she held back, keeping her voice calm. "Wilson Consulting Group is my company. I'm Maya Wilson, CEO and owner. If you check further, you'll see that I am the registered owner of that plane." The receptionist looked uncomfortable, but remained firm. "I'm sorry, Ms. Wilson, but I need additional documentation. This is our standard security procedure." "Security procedure?" Maya repeated, her voice starting to harden. "I've flown out of this airport dozens of times in the past year. I've never had a problem like this." "I'm just following procedure, ma'am," the agent replied, her voice shaking slightly. "Perhaps you should call the real owner of the plane to confirm." Maya took a deep breath, trying to control her anger. "I'm not going to call myself to confirm that I'm allowed to fly on my own plane. I demand to speak to your manager immediately." The agent looked uncomfortable but held her ground. "Yes, ma'am. I'll call my manager." While she waited, Maya looked out the window at the airport, where her plane was parked. She noticed the crew preparing for the flight, people she had hired and paid monthly. Her anger grew even more at the thought that they were waiting for her, while she was being held here on baseless suspicions. A middle-aged man, neatly dressed in a dark suit, approached. "Hello, this is Michael Brennan, airport manager. Is there anything I can help you with?" Maya turned around, trying to keep her composure. "I'm Maya Wilson, CEO of Wilson Consulting Group and owner of the Gulfstream G650 parked outside. Your staff is refusing to let me board my own plane because they don't believe I'm the owner." Michael looked Maya up and down, then back at his computer screen. "I understand, Ms. Wilson. We just need some more confirmation." Can you show us any paperwork that proves you're the CEO of Wilson Consulting Group? Maya felt like she'd been slapped in the face. She pulled out her phone and opened her email app, then showed Michael a series of emails signed by her as CEO. This is my work email. This is our company website with my picture and bio. She quickly scrolled to the About Us page on the company website, where her picture was listed with the title Maya Wilson, founder and CEO. Michael considered this, but remained cautious. I understand, Ms. Wilson. But we need a more formal form of verification. Perhaps you could contact someone in your company to verify? Maya felt as if she were being thrust into an absurd situation. Mr. Brennan, I am the founder and sole owner of this company. There is no one above me to verify. I have flown from this airport dozens of times. I would ask you to double-check your records. Michael flipped through some papers on the counter. I understand your frustration, but we have a responsibility to ensure security. This is not a security issue, Mr. Brennan, Maya interrupted, her voice turning sharp. This is a matter of discrimination. If I were a white man in an expensive suit, would you ask me to prove that I owned the plane? Michael looked uncomfortable with this blunt question. Mrs. Wilson, I assure you that we treat all our customers the same. I am not your client, Mr. Brennan, Maya said, her voice firm. I am the owner of that plane, and I pay for space at your airport. So, in a sense, you are providing me a service. Maya pulled out her phone and dialed a number. After a few seconds, she said, Jake, this is Maya Wilson. I'm having trouble at Teterboro Airport. They won't let me board my own plane. Yes, I need you to send over all the ownership paperwork right away. And call our attorney. It looks like we need to remind Teterboro Airport of its anti-discrimination laws. She ended the call and looked Michael straight in the eye. Jake Allen is my operations manager. He's emailing all the necessary paperwork. In the meantime, I think you should contact the airport's senior management and inform them that they may be facing a major discrimination lawsuit. The tension was palpable as Michael and the receptionist exchanged nervous glances. A few minutes later, an email arrived on Maya's phone. She forwarded it to Michael, a complete set of documents including the aircraft's title, the airport space lease, and the company incorporation papers that listed Maya Wilson as the sole owner. Michael spent a few minutes reviewing the documents, his face turning ashen. Ms. Wilson, I apologize for the misunderstanding. Of course you can board your plane now. We'll make sure this doesn't happen again. I appreciate your apology, Mr. Brennan, Maya said, her voice still firm. But this misunderstanding has made me nearly 30 minutes late for an important meeting. And we all know this is not a misunderstanding. This is prejudice, pure and simple. Maya gathered her papers and walked toward the exit, where a security guard was waiting to escort her to the plane. As they walked, she heard Michael say something harsh to the receptionist. As she walked to the plane, Maya's anger slowly turned to a familiar sadness. Despite her successful career, her multimillion-dollar consulting firm, and her own private jet, she still faced prejudice and discrimination like this. As she approached the plane, she saw her crew lined up next to the stairs, as usual. But today, something was different. She didn't see the familiar face of Captain Frank Anderson, who had flown her for the past 6 months. Instead, a taller, younger man with short blonde hair stood at the front of the line. Good morning, I'm Captain Richard Matthews, the man said as Maya approached. Pleased to meet you. He paused, seemingly waiting for Maya to state her name. I'm Maya Wilson, she said, her voice calm but a little tired. The owner of this plane and your paymaster. Where's Captain Anderson? Richard Matthews looked confused. Oh, I didn't know there was a mistake. I was hired by the airline to be the captain for this flight. I was told we were picking up Jeremiah Wilson. Maya raised an eyebrow. Jeremiah Wilson? There's no Jeremiah Wilson in my company. And I don't hire any new pilots. She turned to look at the familiar flight attendants, Sarah and Brian, who looked uncomfortable. Sarah, what's going on? Maya asked. Sarah stepped forward, looking worried. Mrs. Wilson, we were caught off guard too. Captain Anderson called this morning to say there was a change of plans, and Captain Matthews was taking his place. We were told we were taking a passenger named Jeremiah Wilson. Maya felt her anger rising again. So Frank changed my flight schedule without telling me? And he thought someone named Jeremiah was flying on my plane. Mrs. Wilson, Richard Matthews interjected, it seems there's been a mistake. I'll call the airline right away to clear things up. No need, Captain Matthews, Maya said, her voice cold. I'll clear this up myself. She pulled out her phone and called Frank Anderson. After a few rings, he answered. Frank, this is Maya Wilson. I'm standing next to my plane at Teterboro, and I've been informed that you've changed my flight schedule and hired a new pilot without notifying me. Can you explain this? There was a brief pause before Frank answered, his voice sounding confused. Mrs. Wilson? I apologize for the confusion. I got a call from a man named Jeremiah Wilson, who claimed to be the owner of the plane. He said he needed to fly to San Francisco today and asked me to make arrangements. Maya felt like she'd been slapped in the face for the second time that day. Frank, you've worked for me for 6 months. You know damn well that I'm the sole owner of that plane and my company. How could you trust a random call from a man you've never met? I'm sorry, Mrs. Wilson, Frank said, his voice shaking. He spoke with such confidence and knew so much about the plane. He said you were his sister and that you were just managing the company for him. Maya closed her eyes, trying to control her anger. Frank, I don't have a brother named Jeremiah. I am the sole owner of Wilson Consulting Group and that plane. You've worked for me long enough to know that. Didn't you think to call me to confirm before making such a big change? Frank was silent for a moment before replying. I'm truly sorry, Mrs. Wilson. I made a terrible mistake. That's right, Frank. And that's your last mistake as my pilot. You're fired, effective immediately. Maya hung up and turned to face Richard Matthews, who looked uncomfortable with the situation. Captain Matthews, I apologize for dragging you into this situation. Are you qualified to fly me to San Francisco right now? Richard nodded. Yes, Mrs. Wilson. I am fully booked for this flight. Good, Maya said. Then let's get on board. I'm already late. As Maya walked up the stairs, she heard Sarah whisper to Brian, I can't believe Frank did that. How could he think she wasn't the real owner? Maya paused and turned. Sarah, Brian, can I talk to you for a moment? 2 flight attendants approached, looking concerned. When you were told that you were picking up a man named Jeremiah Wilson instead of me today, did you have any questions? Maya asked, her voice calm but serious. Sarah and Brian exchanged uncomfortable glances. We talked about it, Sarah said, her voice trailing off. We thought maybe you was a family member or a business associate of yours. But you've worked for me for over a year, Maya said. You've flown with me dozens of times. You know I'm the only one who uses this plane for business. Didn't you think you should call me to confirm? We're sorry, Mrs. Wilson, Brian said. We trusted Captain Anderson too much. He's always handled every detail of the flight, and we didn't think to question his judgment. Maya nodded, her expression serious. That's the problem, isn't it? You trusted that a white man like Frank would always make the right decision, even if it meant taking the word of a stranger over the black woman you'd worked with for over a year. Sarah and Brian bowed their heads, shame written all over their faces. I'm not going to fire you today, Maya said after a moment of silence. But I want you to think seriously about this. About how unconscious bias can influence our decisions, even when we don't realize it. Maya boarded the plane, leaving Sarah and Brian standing silently behind. As she sat down in her usual seat and looked out the window, she felt a deep fatigue, not just from the events of this morning, but from the burden of constantly having to prove herself, even in a space she had created and owned. Part 2, Reaction. As the plane took off, Maya closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She needed to focus on the important meeting ahead, but the events of the morning were still swirling in her mind. She opened her eyes as Sarah approached with a glass of fresh orange juice, her usual drink on morning flights. "Is there anything else you need, Mrs. Wilson?" Sarah asked, her voice softer and more respectful than usual. "No, thank you, Sarah," Maya replied. After a moment's hesitation, she added, "Actually, I think we should talk. Both of you, please sit down for a moment." Sarah nodded and gestured to Brian. They sat down in chairs across from Maya, their faces tense. "I don't want you to feel like I'm punishing or bullying you," Maya began, her voice calm. "But I want you to understand why what happened this morning is so important." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "When I started this company 10 years ago, I was confronted by countless people who told me I would fail. There were meetings where I walked into people who assumed I was an assistant or an admin, not a CEO. There were potential clients who refused to work with me because they didn't believe a black woman could understand their business." Sarah and Brian listened intently, their faces serious. "Every day, I have to prove myself 2-3 times more than a white man in my position. Every success, every contract, every new client is the result of hard work and relentless perseverance." Maya looked out the window for a moment, then looked back at her 2 employees. "When I finally got to the point where I could buy my own plane, something I'd worked toward my entire career, I thought that at least in this space, on this plane, I wouldn't have to prove myself anymore. But this morning I was denied boarding my own plane, and my pilot took a stranger at his word simply because he was a man with a similar name." "We're really sorry, Mrs. Wilson," Brian said, his eyes filled with regret. "I never thought I could do something like that, but looking back, I realized that I didn't question Captain Anderson's information as much as I should have." "That's the problem with unconscious bias," Maya said. "We don't realize how deeply we're making assumptions based on social stereotypes. You're not bad people. I don't think you're intentionally discriminating against me. But you didn't question it when you heard that a man named Wilson was coming instead of me, because on some level, that fits with what society has taught us about who can afford to own a private jet." Sarah nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "You're right. I didn't even realize I was making those assumptions. I feel so ashamed." "Don't be ashamed," Maya said, her voice softer. "Learn. And help others learn. That's the only way we can change these stereotypes." Maya looked at them both, seeing the sincerity in their eyes. "I appreciate you listening and acknowledging this. Not everyone is willing to face their prejudices." They continued to talk throughout the first leg of the flight, with Maya sharing more about her experiences and how subtle biases can impact the daily lives of people like her. Sarah and Brian listened attentively, asking questions and engaging respectfully in the conversation. When the conversation ended, Maya felt a little lighter. Perhaps at least some understanding and awareness could come from this unfortunate situation. "We'll be landing in San Francisco shortly," Captain Matthews announced over the intercom. "The weather is nice and the temperature is 72 degrees. We'll be arriving at the private airport in about 20 minutes. Maya pulled out her laptop and began reviewing her presentation for the upcoming meeting. Despite the morning's setbacks, she needed to focus on the work ahead. Part 3, The Meeting. A sleek black Cadillac Escalade whisked Maya from the San Francisco private airport to the headquarters of TechVision, a fast-growing software startup she hoped would become her new client. On the way, she checked her emails and messages, trying to catch up after the morning's interruptions. A text from Jake, her CEO, caught her attention. Looked up Jeremiah Wilson. He's a venture capitalist from Boston who used to work with one of our competitors. It seems he's been trying to steal our TechVision client. Maya frowned. So this wasn't just a random incident of prejudice, but a deliberate attempt to sabotage her meeting. She replied to Jake, "Find out more. I want to know everything about this man and how he knows my schedule." As the car pulled into TechVision's modern office complex, Maya put her thoughts of Jeremiah Wilson aside to focus on the task at hand. She had prepared thoroughly for this meeting, and she wasn't going to let the events of the morning distract her. Greeting her at the entrance was Sophia Chen, TechVision's HR director and her main contact for this potential project. Maya. It's great to finally meet you in person, Sophia said as they shook hands. How was your flight? It was rough, Maya replied with a small smile. But I'm glad to be here. I must say we got a strange call this morning, Sophia said as they entered the building. A man claiming to be a representative of Wilson Consulting Group said you wouldn't be able to make it and wanted to reschedule the meeting. Maya paused, turning to Sophia. His name was Jeremiah, right? Sophia looked surprised. Well, how did you know? It's a long story, Maya said, her tone serious. But in short, someone is trying to sabotage this meeting. That's unbelievable, Sophia explained. Fortunately, we checked with your office and found out it was a false report. I appreciate your caution, Maya said. Not everyone checks that hard. They continued into the large conference room, where TechVision's leadership was waiting. Daniel Park, the company's CEO, stood up to greet Maya. Ms. Wilson, it's great to meet you, he said, his voice warm. We've heard great things about your consulting firm. Thank you, Mr. Park, Maya replied. I'm delighted to be here and look forward to discussing how we can help TechVision during this important period of growth. As Maya began her presentation, she felt her confidence and professionalism return. This was her field, where she shined the most. She detailed how Wilson Consulting Group could help TechVision restructure its management to cope with its rapid growth, giving specific examples from similar projects she had done for other tech companies. The TechVision leadership listened attentively, nodding and asking thoughtful questions. Maya answered each question with confidence and expertise, demonstrating a deep understanding of the industry and the specific challenges startups face. When the presentation ended, Daniel Park stood up, looking pleased. Ms. Wilson, I have to say I'm impressed, he said. You've understood exactly the challenges we're facing, and I believe your approach is what we're looking for. Maya smiled. Thank you, Mr. Park. We've done our homework on TechVision and believe we can create a truly beneficial partnership. I agree, Daniel said. In fact, I don't see any reason to hesitate any longer. We'd like to proceed with Wilson Consulting Group. Maya felt a wave of satisfaction. Despite the morning setbacks, she had managed to secure this big contract. I'm glad to hear that, she said. We can start as soon as you're ready. As the meeting ended and Maya prepared to leave, Sophia approached her. I wanted to tell you something, Sophia said, her voice low enough that only Maya could hear. We've gotten some advice from other companies about not hiring a minority-owned consulting firm. Maya wasn't too surprised, but she still felt a pang in her gut. I guess that's why someone tried to sabotage my meeting today. Sophia nodded. I think so. But Daniel and I did our own research. And we're very impressed with what Wilson Consulting Group has done. Honestly, I think some of that advice comes from your fear of competition. Thanks for sharing this with me, Sophia, Maya said. And thanks for evaluating my company based on facts, not stereotypes. We're always looking for the best people, no matter who they are, Sophia replied. And Wilson Consulting Group definitely fits that bill. Maya left TechVision headquarters feeling satisfied. Despite the prejudice and sabotage she had faced, she had succeeded. It was a reminder of the power of persistence and expertise. Part 4, Confrontation. After a productive day at the company's San Francisco office, Maya returned to the private airport to fly back to New York. She met with her team at the branch office, discussed plans for the TechVision project, and dealt with some other issues related to current clients. As she headed toward her plane, she saw Richard Matthews standing by the stairs, holding a stack of papers. Good evening, Mrs. Wilson, he said. I hope you had a productive day. Good evening, Captain Matthews, Maya replied. Yes, it was a good day indeed, despite the rough start. On that subject, Richard said, I did some research. I know you're wondering how this Jeremiah Wilson could cause so much trouble. Maya raised an eyebrow, curious. What did you find out? It turns out I've met him before, Richard said, his tone serious. Jeremiah Wilson was a former pilot for ExecJet, the aircraft management company I used to work for. He was fired about 6 months ago for inappropriate behavior and attitude issues. Interesting, Maya said. That explains how he knew about my plane and my schedule. Exactly, Richard nodded. He still has connections with some people in the company, and it seems he's been using those connections to get information. I've reported this to ExecJet, and they're investigating internally. Thank you for that, Maya said. I appreciate your help. That's what I should do, Richard replied. And I also want to acknowledge that I overheard your conversation with Sarah and Brian on the flight here. I thought you handled the situation admirably. Maya was a little taken aback by Richard's sincerity. Thank you. It wasn't an easy conversation. I know, Richard said. And I also want to say that I would be honored to continue as your pilot if you're looking for a replacement for Frank. Maya tilted her head, assessing him. I'll consider it, Captain Matthews. Let's see how this flight back to New York goes. They boarded the plane, and Maya took her usual seat. Sarah and Brian treated her with more respect than ever, and Maya could see that they had seriously considered what she had said on the previous flight. As the plane took off and stabilized at cruising altitude, Maya received a text message from Jake. I have a full profile of Jeremiah Wilson. He is a former ExecJet pilot who now works for Cambridge Capital, a venture capital firm with ties to Stellar Consulting, our biggest competitor. It seems he was encouraged to sabotage your meeting with TechVision. Maya shook her head, amazed at the lengths some people would go to thwart her success. But instead of feeling anger, she felt an even stronger determination. Their efforts had failed, and she had won the contract fairly, on her merits. She replied to Jake, thanks for the information. Prepare a lawsuit against both Jeremiah Wilson and Cambridge Capital. We will not let this go. As she put the phone down, Maya heard a soft knock on the door. It was Sarah. Mrs. Wilson, we have dinner ready for you, she said. And I also want to say that I am so grateful that you spoke to us on the flight here. It really made me think about the underlying biases that I might not have realized. Maya smiled. That was an important conversation, Sarah. I am glad it was meaningful to you. A lot, Sarah nodded. I talked to my brother, who works in tech. He said his company often assumes that female engineers are support or administrative, not engineers. I never realized that before. Awareness is the first step, Maya said. And really, that's all I can ask for people to recognize their biases and try to overcome them. Sarah nodded, her eyes filled with determination. You taught me a valuable lesson, and I won't forget it. As Sarah left, Maya turned back to look out the window at the clouds below. She thought about all the other women of color who faced similar barriers in their work and lives. Maybe her story, and how she dealt with these biases, could inspire others to fight for the recognition and respect they deserve. Part 5, Legacy. 1 year later. Maya stood on stage at the Global Women's Leadership Conference in New York, looking out at hundreds of women from all walks of life and industries. She had been invited to be the keynote speaker for the event, and she decided to share the story of that fateful day, the day she was denied boarding her own plane. The most important thing I learned from that experience, she told the crowd, is the power of confronting prejudice head-on, but also with compassion. I could have fired the entire crew on the spot. I could have reacted with anger and bitterness. Instead, I chose to turn it into an educational moment. Maya went on to tell of the conversation she had with Sarah and Brian, and how it led to a shift in their perception. Sarah is now the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for the largest private airline in North America, Maya said with a proud smile. She has turned her experience into a driving force to create meaningful change in her industry. Maya looked down at the front row, where Sarah was sitting, nodding with obvious pride. As for Jeremiah Wilson and the people who tried to sabotage my meeting, Maya continued, my lawsuit against them was settled out of court. But more importantly, it highlighted a larger issue, the way women of color in business often face not only subtle biases but also deliberate attempts to thwart their success. Maya paused, looking around the room. My company has doubled in size over the past year. TechVision has not only become a major client, but also a partner and supporter, introducing us to many other tech companies. And I launched a scholarship program for female business students of color, with the goal of creating the next generation of diverse business leaders. Applause erupted from the room. I'm not sharing this story to gain sympathy or to complain about injustice, Maya said as the applause died down. I'm sharing it because it illustrates an important point. When faced with prejudice, we have two choices. We can let it make us bitter and angry, or we can use it as an opportunity to educate, raise awareness, and ultimately, create change. Maya looked around the room again, her eyes landing on the young women looking at her with admiration written all over their faces. And to any of you struggling for recognition and respect in your field, I want to say this: never let someone else's preconceived notions define who you are or what you can achieve. Continue to break barriers, prove the doubters wrong, and take your place with the confidence you deserve. Maya ended her speech with a call to action, encouraging people to not only confront the prejudice in their own lives, but to support and uplift others who are struggling with similar challenges. Remember, she concluded, true success is not just about what we achieve for ourselves, but how we open the doors of opportunity for others. When we lift each other up, we all fly higher. Maya was greeted by thunderous applause as she left the stage. As she walked down the steps, she saw Richard Matthews, now her chief pilot, standing at the back of the room, clapping with pride. After the conference, Maya was surrounded by women who wanted to share their stories, asked for advice, or simply thank her for speaking up about their experiences. She took the time to listen to each person, knowing that sometimes the most valuable thing she could offer was the confirmation that they weren't alone in their struggles. When Maya finally left the conference and got into the waiting car, she found Sarah waiting for her. "That was a great speech, Mrs. Wilson," Sarah said. "I really appreciate you sharing our story." "Thank you, Sarah," Maya replied. "And please call me Maya. I think we're past the formality stage." Sarah smiled. "Maya, I just want you know that day changed my life. It opened my eyes in ways I never thought possible. And now, in my new role, I can see clearly the subtle biases that play out in the airline industry every day." "You're making a difference, Sarah," Maya said. "That's the most important thing." "And I couldn't have done it without you," Sarah said. "You had every reason to fire me that day, but instead you chose to educate me. It was a lesson in leadership that I will never forget." Maya hugged Sarah. Sometimes the best response to prejudice is not anger, but education. Not punishment, but empowerment. As they parted and Maya got into the car, she looked out the window, thinking about her journey. From a young girl with big dreams to a successful businesswoman, she had faced countless barriers and prejudices. But instead of letting them discourage her, she turned them into motivation, into fuel for her determination. The car sped through Manhattan toward Teterboro Airport, the same airport where this story began a year ago. But this time, when Maya stepped into the car, she was greeted with respect and recognition. No more suspicious looks, no more questions about her right to board her own plane. As she climbed the stairs, Maya paused to look back. She thought of all the women who had come before her, who had broken barriers to get her here today. And she thought of all the women who would come after her, who might face fewer barriers because of her efforts and those of others like her. Maya Wilson boarded her plane, not just a successful businesswoman, not just the proud owner of a jet, but a trailblazer, a woman who had faced prejudice with courage, dignity, and relentless determination, and had won not only for herself but for all who came after her. As the plane took off, Maya looked down at New York City spread out below, glowing in the evening light. She smiled, feeling a sense of peace and accomplishment. It hadn't always been an easy journey, but it was her journey, and she wouldn't have wanted it any other way.